any members of Scholars for 9/11 Truth until yesterday, when I met my co-chair, Steve Jones. How about that? Where are you, fella? But for the internet. And I say, you know, the reason I mention it last is because when the internet goes, you will know that freedom and democracy are being extinguished. It's the old story about the frog, right? He's in a pot, and they're only heating the temperature 1 degree at a time, and the frog really doesn't notice that he's being cooked until it's too late. This is where we are. Now, there's a convergence of opinion about the state of mind of our leaders. Paul Craig Roberts, for example, a former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and a noted public intellectual who seems to me to be reflecting a greater degree of awareness of the true state of the nation than his better-known compatriot, Noam Chomsky, observed that in a 17 March editorial, William Rivers Pitt, who edits Truth Out, which is one of the most reliable and useful sources on the internet for what's currently going on, a source of reprinting the most important articles of the day. He wrote that Bush is deranged, disconnected, and dangerous. And Paul Craig Roberts is saying Bush's recent public addresses are confirming it. Bush gave, this is Paul Craig Roberts now speaking, Bush gave a delusional speech that shows he's detached from reality. We're going to help the Iraqis build a strong democracy that will be an inspiration throughout the Middle East, a democracy that will be a partner in the global war against the terrorists. And Bush goes on to say that American security is directly related to democracy in Iraq. And Paul Craig Roberts says, how realistic is it to suppose that this puny, weak little country in the Middle East should pose a threat to American security? And it brought to mind a thought I've had many times before. Listen, we fear weapons of mass destruction. There was one country that had more weapons of mass destruction than the rest of the world combined, other than the United States. That was the Soviet Union. We lived in a certain kind of uneasy harmony with the Soviet Union because of an understanding of the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. We knew if the Soviets hit us, that we could obliterate them, and they knew it too. We knew if we hit them, they could obliterate us, and they knew that too. So that neither nation would threaten to attack the other for fear of obliteration. Well, if that's true of the Soviet Union with its massive supply of intercontinental ballistic missiles, what then of some solitary little petty dictator like Saddam Hussein or Iran? Does anyone seriously think that even if Iraq had a weapon of mass destruction, that it would actually use it against the United States, which would simply assure or guarantee its obliteration? I mean, we have lost our way here. A doctrine that gave us a sane policy of defense in a nuclear world has simply been jettisoned and ignored. There's no reason whatsoever to suspect that if a North Korea gains nuclear weapons, or an Iran gains nuclear weapons, or an Iraq had gained nuclear weapons, that they would use them against the United States. It would be suicide on a national scale. So, of course, they want to suggest these people are demented and insane. Well, however demented Saddam may have been, he ran a much better Iraq than the United States. Well, we're going to have to assume, I think, that our leaders are demented. There's a convergence of opinion here. And the question we have to consider, which can be very unpleasant, if not even terrifying, is what can happen when the lunatics are running the asylum. I want to offer several scenarios here that result from my efforts to think about the unthinkable, trying to get inside the minds of the demented. Insanity prevails, first scenario. Rumors of detention facilities are true. Surveillance is used to identify political enemies. The population is docile. We simply disappear. This is the sheeple version, okay? We are sheep. We simply disappear. Here's a variation on the sheeple hypothesis. They use the threat of bird flu to demand inoculation of every citizen of the United States. But because of their surveillance, they know exactly who they are inoculating. And although we don't know, there are two different vaccines, one that protects you from bird flu, the other that gives it to you. And they argue later that, well, statistically, it was only 0.5% who actually got the bird flu. And then we realized belatedly, my God, that 0.5% included David Ray Griffin, Alex Jones, Steve Jones, Jim Fetzer. What in God's name was going on here? This isn't rocket science, my friends, but this is a very real possibility, I'm so sorry to say. Or alternatively, people realize what's going on, use arms to resist our own army, now supplemented by mercenary forces. Civil war breaks out. We fight a second revolutionary war in an effort to restore democracy to our country. We are non-sheep. This is the non-sheeple alternative. Well, some might say, well, both of those make the assumption that insane moves are going to be made by this administration. Aren't there any alternatives? Suppose sanity prevails. Saner heads prevail. Electronic voting machines are abandoned. Congress is reconstituted. Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld face impeachment. Oh. Bush, Rumsfeld, Cheney face impeachment. Now, they're not going to take that line down. Here we have Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst, saying Iran strike is set for June or July. That the staged terror attack, there's going to be staged terrorist attacks across Europe and U.S. They're probable to justify the invasion of Iran. He says the propaganda has been laid, the aircraft carriers are in place, it doesn't take much to fly the bombers out of British and U.S. bases, cruise missiles are at the ready, Israel is egging us on. There are likely consequences of this scenario, of course. He said, mobilizing worldwide terrorist cells would make al-Qaeda look like a girls' netball team. Utilizing its cruise missile arsenal, they could take out U.S. ships. Sending fighters into Iraq to attack U.S. forces, say 3 divisions of Iranian fighters in Iraq could pretty much decimate all of our American forces. And I've received, just as I was heading down here, a false flag atrocity alert from someone I know who is a retired colonel in the Air Force and whom I consider to be a trustworthy source, pointing out that the Mossad has sent a warning to 650 UK journalists about a threat to the English World Cup squad. It was sent out on the 31st of May. That this has to be taken seriously because similar warnings from Israel appeared on the internet prior to both the staged false flag atrocities in New York on 9/11 and in London on 7/7. That there's extremely high likelihood in his judgment of a staged false flag atrocity on or around the 5th of June, not necessarily the 6th. For those of you interested in numerology and the occult, of course, 666, which will be the date on Tuesday, is the same number that in a certain apocalyptic theology stands for the sign of the beast, okay, or the devil. Ronald Reagan and his wife Nancy actually purchased a retirement home that had the address 666. So Nancy had it changed to 668. The point I'm making here is 7/11, 7/7, 9/11, 666 has a certain cachet to it, right? You're going to remember those dates. And I think that for theological reasons, that it's all too likely that such a false flag operation on the 6th might be irresistible. Now that, my friends, is the sane scenario. What can we do? What can be done? Inform others. Number 1, get the word out. Tell them what we're learning, what we're piecing together. Number 2, see if we can instruct the military that they not only have an obligation not to follow immoral orders. They're not only not obligated to follow immoral orders, but they have a positive duty not to follow them. 3, reconstitute Congress. Get rid of all the Democrats, all the Republicans. The whole Congress is so corrupt, it's unbelievable. Get people in there who are going to stand up for the nation. In order to accomplish that, however, you have to jettison electronic voting machines. Otherwise, they're going to continue to steal elections right under our nose. Every American could know what's going on and vote for the right candidate, and these guys could still find themselves in control of Congress if we don't get rid of those voting machines. Number 5, I don't understand why district attorneys and attorneys general are not picking up the issues here about the commission of crimes in their states. The Attorney General in New York in Virginia and Pennsylvania, all are in the position where there's more than sufficient evidence to justify launching a criminal investigation. And I assure them that members of Scholars for 9/11 Truth would be willing to come in course and testify under oath in support of criminal actions. Impeach Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, it should be done. But, mind you, that's going to provoke a reaction from them to defend themselves, and we may find ourselves then back in the midst of one of the insane scenarios. Seventh, arm the population. It dismays me in the extreme that I am compelled to side with the NRA. But I must tell you that an armed citizen may ultimately be our last bastion of defense against a tyrannical government. Now, you may find these things difficult to imagine, but if our research is right, then this administration has already committed mass murder by killing approximately 3,000 innocent Americans on 9/11. I am personally convinced that during the campaign of 2002, they were responsible for the death of an admirable United States senator named Paul Wellstone, who had the courage to stand up against them and was threatened by the Vice President of the United States, who told him that if he opposed them on Iraq, there would be severe ramifications for him personally and for the state of Minnesota. And I cannot imagine more severe ramifications than taking him out. And his wife together. And there were reasons for that, so she couldn't stand up for him, as it happened with Mel Carnahan. The people of Missouri preferred to vote for a dead man to returning John Ashcroft to the Senate. If worse comes to worse, what are going to be the signs? They're going to go after the militias. These armed groups may be fierce in their determination and commitment, but helicopter gunships, it's just horrible, the effects they have on human beings and other living things. After the militants, they're going to come after 9/11 skeptics. We know too much. We threaten to contaminate the rest of the world with truth. War critics, anti-war protesters, the Greens, the progressives, the liberals, the Unitarians, the Congregationalists, and maybe even eventually the principled Republicans. Don't think things like this can't happen here. They already are. Can we prevail? I wish I knew. But we have to try. The stakes could not be higher. What's going on in our nation is like cancer. Anyone who has had cancer, as I have had, knows that the claim that what you don't know can't hurt you is as false as could possibly be. What we have and what we're dealing with in this country is a cancer on the body politic. And we have to confront it and excise it if we're going to be restored to a state of health.